Right, so yes, I'm going to try and fit 10 trends in 15 minutes. I've written a report for this event, which is about 15,000 words, so not a piece of editorial, but a kind of PDF report that people can buy, but you guys will get it for free. I'll go into the details of that at the end, but I'm going to try and summarize those 15,000 words in 15 minutes, or 10, as Chris would prefer. Very briefly, I'm a freelance games journalist. I used to be editor of Develop magazine, now Pocket Gamer Develop, Eurogamer Edge, a couple of UK newspapers. But we're not here to listen to about me. So let's get on. Trend one is this idea of publishing is dead, long live publishing. As I started doing the research, there was quite a lot of talk about is publishing, the kind of traditional model of publishing, applied to kind of retail box products making a return. And it's not quite, but there is this new model of publishing emerging. It's kind of taken the old form and reshaped it. So now it includes, as well as traditional publishing services, monetization services, data analytics, the kind of games as a service back-end and cloud stuff, discoverability, funding services, quite a lot of funding stuff seems to be coming into it, and more PR and marketing. From the journalist perspective, this kind of new publishing model is pretty helpful. So if you're a developer and looking at companies provide that, it's definitely working from kind of my end of the deal. Ones to watch include Scopely and Tilting Point. Do have a look at them. They're offering kind of interesting models. And yeah, in each of these trends, I'm going to include a quote from the report. So Matthew Wilson from Rovio Stars, which is Rovio's kind of newish publishing operation, he says he does believe that publishing's role is becoming more important going forward in mobile gaming. So there is something of a return of publishing happening, or at least a rebirth of a new form of publishing. So, trend two. This is ridiculous. If I gathered all the people in a room that this didn't need to be told to, it would be you lot sitting in this room. But it was part of the report, so let's burn through it anyway. Finland continues to be this dominant power for games that are successful in the West, in Latin America, increasingly in Southeast Asia, and even creeping into the kind of North Asian markets. And some stats, of course, provided by Neo Games. 200 games companies, 2,400 staff in a country with a fairly small populace. In 2013, the industry was valued at 3.3 billion. That's pretty impressive going, again, relative to the size of the country. 37% based here. Again, you're here, so I presume you know a lot of this stuff. Interestingly, 50% of Finland's games companies are in startup mode. They've appeared in the last 2 years, so you can see how vibrant the startup scene is. Why? I guess in brief, Nokia, in kind of establishing that foundation of understanding mobile, was really important. In research, I realized established in 1865, doing rubber and paper stuff. Didn't realize that. The other thing is demo scene, which love demo scenes, so if I start talking about it, I'll fill the whole 15 minutes. But a kind of creative coding in a competition context, which kind of served to make a lot more younger people coding literate. But yeah, I won't go on to talking about demo scene, or I'll get very excited and boring at the same time. So yeah, we spoke to Andrew Stallbo in this section of the report, and he was talking about this idea that all boats rise. There's a collaborative nature to the Finnish dev scene, which rivals a lot of countries, so maybe something to look at. But again, I'm not going to loiter on this because you lot are all in Finland, and thus I presume you know about Finland and the mobile industry. So, trend three, something John touched on very briefly, is there this return of premium? Again, from the journalist perspective, there's this real affection for premium. I certainly, when I'm as a freelancer pitching in reviews, pitching in features, editors are a bit more beguiled by a paid game. It seems a little ridiculous to me, as a journalist who enjoys free-to-play and premium and all kinds of games. So, yeah, there is that beguiling of the press, and there have been a lot of recent successes. Minecraft was probably a little while ago now, but Monument Valley you can't have missed. That's been so heavily promoted by Apple, kind of backing up what John says. It seems that the store providers are starting to warm to premium a little more than they have in a long time, but also out there, Football Manager, which included IAP, Leo's Fortune, Badland. There's all these really high quality paid premium games, and certainly from the journalist perspective, it's easier to be able to write about them. Because of it, Super Data recently, based on all their data, termed this horrible term, I'm not even going to bother. There's no point in that word. But the fact remains, I think 94% was possibly China, but on a country-by-country basis, across the Apple App Store, free-to-play accounted for 70 to 94% of free-to-play accounted for 70 to 94% of revenues. So free-to-play isn't going away by any stretch, and I think if premium's revenues are climbing, it's fractional, but premium status and the opportunity to have your games supported by store providers certainly seems to be falling in the favour of paid. Ben Cousins, formerly of DNA, a consultant I'm sure you know of, he kind of said, and I interviewed him for the report, and he said about, if you want to go for lifetime value and you want to make a lot of money, it's still got to be free to play. But obviously, you need that huge amount of money to invest. You need the money to support and advertise it. And that's not available to people. So maybe there's a new attraction in what paid can offer. Maybe it's suddenly becoming a bit more realistic a model. My words have disappeared off the bottom of the slide there. But anyway, we're running out of time. So let's move on to trend 4. Asian mergers and acquisitions. Are they continuing to reshape the global power balance? It really seems like they are. The famous one is obviously SoftBank and Gung Ho's 1.53 billion acquisition of 51% of Supercell. It's certainly something, at least from the industry and trade side of journalism, that we like to write about, and it's easy to get headlines from in terms of the press perspective. There were, across 2013, there was 3.3 billion spent in mergers and acquisitions. In that same period, 8 of the 10 of those largest acquisitions were acquisitions from Asia, from the north of Asia mainly. And so I spoke to Yun Utsaka, business development manager. These really didn't overrun on my little laptop, but there you go, that's my bad. He is the business development manager and producer at Line. And he certainly, when I spoke to him for the report, again, you can read it in detail in the report, there was definitely an interest. Asian game companies are aware of both the audience and the industry in the West, and they're aware of it from a mergers and acquisitions context. So it seems it's going to continue, and it seems that the balance of power in terms of ownership is shifting towards Asia more and more. I mean, it's not like it's been small before. Trend 5 is the future of discoverability. It seems that CPI, as we all know, remains the dominant model there, but it is getting less support from app stores, as John alluded to, or not alluded to, just said. And it seems to be getting worse rather than better. I trawled through loads and loads of data from all kinds of people, and it seems that iOS CPI for loyal paying users rose from June 2013 at $1.24 to $1.92 in April 2014. Android, a less significant ratio in the growth from 90 cents to $1.01, but it's still climbing. Going back to Ben Cousins, who I spoke to a lot for this report, the only 2 viable methods, according to him, are support from the platform holder. That kind of maybe goes back to paid again at the moment, and buying users. So you could say that trend is that nothing's changed apart from the trend continues. Trend 6 is Brazil's continued rise. I spent my childhood and still skateboarding and not playing football, so I don't know anything about it, but there's some kind of World Cup going on. That isn't actually why I chose this slide. It's not just kind of typical journalist topical segueing. Brazil has kind of been identified as an emerging market as part of the BRIC countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, for a long time. So it's kind of almost got, there's this feeling of waiting for it to become tangible. But there's a new Apple factory underway there. 4G's just arrived. Smartphone penetration nearly doubled from 2012 to 2013, so it's now at just over 26%. There's 217, that ratio, looking at the current data, it looks like the penetration, I don't know if it's going to double again, but it is just thundering on tremendously there. And there's a really high player-to-payer ratio in mobile gaming in Brazil. 61% of gamers regularly invest, are kind of loyal paying users. And yeah, I spoke to Marcelo Tavares, who's director of the Brazil Game Show, which is getting increasingly big and increasingly impressive. It's kind of a easy demonstration at a glance of what's happening in Brazil year on year. And there's now 200 small to medium studios in Brazil, and most of them are in mobile. So, you know, Brazil still hasn't reached this point that we've been hearing about for quite a long time, but it feels finally like it's getting really, really close to being there, and some people are playing football there. Oh. Trend 7. Is PC stealing mobile's grassroots studios? So there was 10 years ago, there was definitely, and probably even 8, 9 years ago, there was this talk about PC gaming being dead, and that PC gaming was completely dead in the water due to piracy, and it was over. And then Steam came along in 2003. Obviously, indie gaming's existed as long as the games industry, but it was that timing was this perfect storm for indie gaming, and now it has become a kind of darling of the indie game and startup scene in terms of that's what mobile, before the discoverability issues came along, if that tiny bit of time, mobile was a place where studios would use as a proving ground, experiment with creative ideas. And I don't want to overplay this because it's really hard to find numbers on it, but Steam has this new attraction. It certainly has this new cultural clout. 75 million active users, okay, that's not a tremendous amount compared to some mobile numbers. It's climbing increasingly quickly, 10 million extra users from October 2013, and 3,000 games on there, and again offering that journalist perspective. And so the national UK newspapers I do game reviews for, if I try and pitch in a mobile game review, they want me to do 3 mobile games in 100 words. If a game is on Steam, which if you don't know, Steam is kind of an app store for PC, Mac, and Linux. If a game is on Steam, it just makes it all the easier. It gives me more word count. There's definitely the money and the user numbers aren't there, but Steam certainly has this new attraction, and it's certainly beguiling newspaper and magazine website editors. And yeah, it does seem, I spoke to a number of small studios, and there was this idea, although converting your game is difficult, there was this idea of doing it first on Steam as a kind of test release almost before you go to mobile. So Steam and PC is something to watch in terms of interesting games. I guess that's the lesson. I mentioned Tilting Point before. Apologies if I'm getting the name wrong, the pronunciation of the name wrong. Jesse Divnik, he kind of said to me that he definitely, although there wasn't a migration away from mobile, going Steam first was something they were certainly seeing from studios that typically would be going mobile first. Has crowdfunding lost its way? I'm going to have to go really quickly here, but there was a time, again offering that journalist perspective, when almost something being on Kickstarter or Indiegogo or the Fundy or the many others was enough to write about it. It's almost the opposite now. You get Kickstarter and the other crowdfunding platforms have their own discoverability issues in that there's so many projects on there, 4,000 to 10,000 game projects. Admittedly, a couple of thousand of those are tabletop gaming, but there are so many projects at any one time. It's almost a turn off for journalists now because the amount of contact I get on a near daily basis saying, oh, this game's on Kickstarter, this game's on Indiegogo, do you want to write about it? A minute and a half, bloody hell, I've got a minute and a half left. But the stats suggest rude health. I mean, there's that 1.1 billion has been pledged since it began on over 62,000 projects, 3,430 successful game projects already, 34 of those game projects have made $1 million. And that's just Kickstarter, who's open with their data compared to everyone else. So yeah, the rate of games failing is climbing a tiny bit. It's now at 65%. It's trickling upward. There's also the huge issue of your successful project and then making release. I couldn't damn well find the exact numbers, but certainly it's easy to find games that were hugely successful on Kickstarter and then collapsed. Crowdfunding is still a great way to make money for your project. It doesn't guarantee coverage. It may even impede your chances there. I'm going to move on now, but I spoke to the guy from Trent from League of Geeks. They've had a lot of success with Armello recently, and he said that it's actually just settling down, so that's probably the best way to think about it. Trend 9, IPOs on the rise. Oh, I've got barely any time, but the King IPO and the Zynga IPO, people either tell you it was a crippling failure, or it was a expected difficulty of an IPO, and that actually the market is maturing, and it's a kind of a positive sign. I'm going to fly past all that data. I'll send my slides to anyone if they really want to see it, but there's far more of this data in the report, loads and loads of numbers. But yeah, Nicholas Lovell, who is just peering like a what no Kilroy over the bottom of the screen there with his name, said that it kind of suggests that the markets, not the mobile industry, the markets are starting to kind of mature in their attitude. And there's a new caution from a lot of companies. I can see Chris moving around, so let's get into Trend 10. And I think Oren talked about this, so I'm kind of reiterating what he said. But could brand marketing be back? This idea that traditional kind of non-digital marketing, such as billboards and TV and merchandising and cross-promotion with fast food products and all of that kind of thing, it seems really, it is making a comeback. It's really expensive. There's this kind of bitter irony that it's more useful to paid games, but it's more in the price range of those making huge, well-backed, financially backed free-to-play games. And I'm probably just going to have to leave it at that, aren't I? So very quickly, if you go to pocketgamer.biz/PGBN, you can download the full report if you register. There are these cards. If you haven't been given one, they're available at reception. There's a little code, and you can download these reports for free that otherwise would not be free.
Fantastic.
And there's my email address if you want a journalist's email address. And thank you.
Wow.